Tonight's story is called The Girl Who Always Arrived with the Tide. Subscribe to stay on top of the next story and hear more peaceful journeys like this. Each one made to help you drift off slowly, gently, and deeply. And before you close your eyes completely, we'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight? Leave a comment below and let us know. Chapter 1: The Driftwood Door. There was a beach where the waves whispered longer than they crashed, where the wind took its time, where the stars stayed out just a little longer in the morning, as if reluctant to leave the sky. On this beach, the sand was soft as sifted flour, and the water sometimes shimmered with secrets. And it was there, just after the moon had tipped into its final crescent, that the girl always arrived. No one knew her name at first. She never said it. Not at the beginning. She came in with the tide, not walking, not swimming, but simply arriving. As though the sea itself had carried her, gentle as a lullaby. The locals had grown used to her quiet arrivals. Old Marla, who ran the sleepy little cafe at the edge of the boardwalk, said she'd seen the girl appear 4 times now, always on the same kind of morning, misty, slow, with the breeze moving backwards like it had forgotten where it was going. She comes when the sea needs her to, Marla would say softly, polishing a teacup that didn't need it. And she leaves when the tide remembers. The girl was always barefoot, always calm, always carrying something small and strange, once a conch shell with swirling pinks, once a compass that didn't point north, once a tiny lantern that glowed even in sunlight. And though she rarely spoke, she watched everything. The gulls as they circled above the rocks, the crabs as they danced sideways over the titterpoles, the sky as it pressed itself gently against the sea, blue on blue, forever meeting and never quite merging. One morning, the 5th time she returned, she walked not toward the cafe or the dune path or even the old pier where driftwood gathered like forgotten thoughts. She walked to the edge of the beach where an outcropping of stone leaned crookedly into the sea. And there, tucked beneath its mossy shoulder, was something no one else had ever noticed. A door. Wooden. Weathered. Made of driftwood and seen knots and threads of kelp woven tightly together. The girl paused. Knelt. Ran her hand along the frame like someone remembering something long ago. And then, slowly, as though it had been waiting just for her, the door creaked open. Behind it was not a room, not a cave, not even a tunnel. Just more sand. Softer. Paler. Untouched. And something about that untouched sand felt older than anything else around. She stepped through. The door closed behind her with a sigh. Not a slam. Not a click. Just a sigh, like the sea itself exhaling. Chapter 2: Where the Sand Remembers. The sand on the other side of the driftwood door was nothing like the beach she had left behind. It was smooth, not just from the wind or the tide, but from time. And it shimmered faintly, like moonlight had once soaked into it and decided to stay. The girl stood still. Her name, not yet spoken aloud, hummed quietly in her chest, like a melody waiting for the right verse. She could feel something beneath her bare feet, gentle and strange. Not movement exactly, but memory. Each grain of sand held something. A laugh from long ago. promise whispered into sea foam. The soft footfalls of someone who had come here once. Or maybe more than once. She knelt, running her fingers along the delicate ripples that stretched across the ground. They weren't patterns made by wind or water. They were trails, like writing. Not letters, but meaning. The kind that didn't need words. She closed her eyes, listened, and there it was. A voice, not loud, not near, but patient. Like it had always been here. This is the place before waking, it said, though no mouth spoke. The place the tide remembers when it forgets the shore. The girl didn't answer. Not because she was afraid, but because answering too quickly would be the same as interrupting a song. Instead, she rose and began to walk. Each step she took revealed something new. A ribbon of sea glass arranged in the shape of a spiral. A feather anchored upright in the sand, unmoving despite the breeze. A shell so large and round, it looked like it had been carved by the moon itself. The girl paused beside the shell. There were symbols etched on its surface. Again, not letters, not words, but meaning. She touched the shell gently. A pulse, a sound, low, like the echo of a wave that had rolled back centuries ago. We do not sleep because we are tired, the voice came again. We sleep because we are listening. And suddenly, the girl remembered something she didn't know she had forgotten. A beach, not this one, where she once drew circles in the sand with her toe. A dolphin that had followed her shadow, then vanished with a splash and a wink. A woman's voice, warm, wrapped in laughter, calling her back inside before the tide turned. And with the memory came a question. Had she been here before? Had she always been coming here? Was she made from the tide itself, shaped by waves, carried by hush, returned again and again to remember what others had forgotten? She walked on, and the path shifted, rising slightly into dunes that were not made of sand, but woven reeds and old rope, tangled gently like forgotten dreams. At the crest of the tallest dune stood something unexpected. A boat. Upside down. As though it had fallen gently from the sky and landed without a sound. She walked toward it, her heart steady and slow. There were carvings on the boat's hull. Names. Some were faded. Others shimmered faintly, new, or maybe just remembered more often. She didn't touch them. Instead, she sat in the shadow of the boat and looked out toward the horizon, where sky met water in a soft, uncertain line. There, in the air, the wind was beginning to curl. Not quickly, not sharply, but with intention. Something was coming. Not a storm, not danger, but change. The kind that feels like a breeze brushing your cheek just before you fall asleep. The girl waited, and as she did, the voice returned. You have always known the way here. You have always come with the tide. Not to find, but to remember. She closed her eyes, and the sea breathed with her. The girl who always arrived with the tide. Chapter 3, The Whispers Underneath the Waves. The sun never burned here. It glowed, soft as a pearl tucked into the sky, casting light that didn't chase shadows, only softened them. The girl walked slowly now, guided not by sight but by the pull beneath her ribs. A quiet magnetism. A hush wrapped in longing. She left behind the upside-down boat. The trail ahead was a ribbon of mist that wound through tide pools like silver thread. In each pool, life stirred, not frantically, not afraid. Just gently. As if the world itself breathed slower here. In one pool, a starfish turned lazily on a polished stone. In another, sea urchins blinked, not with eyes, but with memory. The water whispered as she passed, not in words, but in warmth. Each ripple brushed her ankle like a secret saying, "You're close." She didn't know how far she'd come. She only knew the beach no longer looked like a place. It felt like a song. And just ahead, rising out of the tide mist like an echo given form, stood a figure. She wasn't startled. She'd expected him somehow. He looked like a boy, but not quite. His hair floated slightly even though there was no water. His eyes were deep, not dark, like the surface of the ocean at night. He stood at the edge of a still pool, watching fish that shimmered like old thoughts. He didn't speak. Not at first. Instead, he held out a hand. In it was a smooth stone, pale and round, no bigger than her thumb. When she took it, she felt something move inside her. Not fear. Not joy. Recognition. "You dropped this," he said, finally. His voice was soft, low. "A long time ago." She looked down at the stone. No marks. No color. Just smooth, quiet knowing. "Did I come here before?" she asked. The boy tilted his head. "Not exactly. But you've always been here. Part of you never left." She frowned. Not confused, just curious. "Why?" He crouched beside the pool, dipping his hand in. The water didn't ripple. It folded inward like fabric. "Because some memories aren't made," he said. "They're carried. Passed on like tide between moons." The girl sat beside him. They listened to the pool. Inside, tiny creatures swam in loops, not looking for anything, just moving because motion was the way they remembered being alive. "What is this place?" she asked. The boy looked up at the sky, where clouds curled like driftwood smoke. "It's what comes before forgetting," he said. "Or after. Depends which way the tide's going." She thought about that. "And me?" He smiled, small and slow. "You're someone who remembers things others drop behind." She looked at the stone again. "Like this?" He nodded. "That one's not just yours. It's been passed through more hands than the sea has shells." She tucked the stone into her palm, feeling its warmth. It didn't glow. It didn't hum. But it was heavy in a way that felt right. The boy stood. "Come on," he said. "It's almost time." "Time for what?" He grinned now, just a little. "For the tide to turn." They walked together along the pools until they reached a ridge of wet, shining rock. Beyond it, water. Endless, open. Still, but not silent. A song echoed from beneath the surface. Not sung with mouths. sung with memory. The girl stepped to the edge. Beneath the waves, shapes moved slowly. Figures. Walking. As if the ocean floor were a path of its own. She turned to the boy. "Who are they?" "The ones who never quite left," he said. "They're not ghosts. They're echoes. Dreamers too deep to wake, but not too far to reach." She leaned forward. One of the figures below turned upward. For a moment, just a moment, their eyes met. The girl gasped. She knew that face. She didn't know how or why, but it was hers. Not now. Not yet. But someday. A future self? A dream still unfolding? The moment passed. The figure continued on, disappearing into the hush below. The girl turned back to the boy. "Why show me this?" His answer came slowly. "Because the tide will call for you someday, too." She looked out at the sea. It wasn't scary. It wasn't final. It was a door. Just like the one behind the driftwood. The boy stepped back. "When you're ready," he said, "you'll come find us." "Will I remember?" He smiled. "Only the parts you need." Then the tide pulled once. Not loudly, not sharply. Just enough to remind her. It was time to go. Chapter 4: The Drift Between Dreams. She awoke not in her bed, not on the sand, but somewhere softly in between. The world was quiet. Not silent, but full of hush. The kind of hush that happens before a story is told, or just after a tear is wiped away. Around her, the air shimmered faintly, like heat rising from stones, though the temperature was cool. Not cold, gentle. Familiar. Kind. She stood slowly. The ground beneath her feet wasn't sand or earth or sea. It was woven. A tapestry of places she'd walked in her dreams and forgotten by morning. Waves stitched beside windows, footprints beside feathers, sky alongside song. "You're in the drift," came a voice. She turned, expecting the boy from before. But this time, she saw a woman. Or perhaps not a woman, but the shape of one. Tall. Wind-voiced. Skin flickering like sunlight on tidewater. Her face was both young and old. Eyes deep as titterpools, soft as dusk. The girl didn't speak. She didn't need to. "You've wandered further than most," said the figure, voice curling like kelp. The girl stepped forward. "What is the drift?" "It's the part of the dream where forgetting and remembering trade places." The girl looked around. Tiny fish swam lazily through the air, their fins leaving trails like ink in water. A sandcastle stood whole and untouched nearby, its towers impossibly tall, its windows shaped like crescent moons. In its shadows, she saw flickers, her younger self, perhaps, or someone else, playing alone. Drawing spirals in the wet sand. "Is this mine?" she asked softly. "It's all yours," said the woman. "But it's also shared. Everything left behind in sleep ends up here eventually. Stories with no endings. Wishes with no answers. Promises made beneath waves." The girl walked toward the sandcastle. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused, waiting. Inside, the rooms were filled with drifted objects. A sandal with a name written inside in faded pen. A jar of fog sealed with a blue ribbon. A small flute carved from coral, humming faintly even though no one touched it. Each one whispered something she almost remembered. "You've come far," said the woman, appearing in the doorway now. "But the tide is turning." The girl looked out one of the shell-shaped windows. The sky above the drift was beginning to shift. Soft pastels deepening into deeper blue, as though night were preparing a place to land. "Do I have to leave?" she asked. The woman nodded. "The tide never holds what it loves. It only carries, then returns." The girl took one last look at the objects around her. She reached out, touching none, then stepped from the castle. Outside, the woven ground began to soften. Not disappear. Just fade. Like a dream that lets go gently. The girl turned back toward the sea. It waited, as it always had. The woman placed a hand over the girl's heart, though it felt more like a wind brushing gently through her chest. "What you remember is yours. What you forget is not lost. Only sleeping." Then, as the tide began to hum, low and strong and deep, the girl stepped forward. Not afraid. Not uncertain. Only ready. The drift folded inward, slow and kind. And she returned to the beach. Chapter 5, The Shore That Knew Her Name. She woke with her cheek pressed to the warm sand. Not startled. Not confused. Just peaceful. The kind of waking that feels like finishing a long conversation with someone you love. No need to rush. No need to remember everything. Just the knowing that something important has already happened. The sun was rising low, a sleepy orange just peeking over the waves. The beach was empty, as always. But not lonely. She sat up slowly. Her dress was still damp from the tide. Salt dusted her skin in tiny crystals. Her fingers were still curled gently, as if she had been holding something invisible all night. She didn't try to remember her dreams. They were already part of her now. What she did remember was a feeling. A voice like the sea. A castle of sand that never crumbled. A girl named Mira who might have been her. Or might have been watching. And a shore that didn't forget. She stood. The beach stretched out on both sides, exactly as it always had. But now she saw it differently. The small shells scattered like constellations. The tiny spiral crabs that moved just out of sight. The hush between the waves, thicker now, like something waiting to be noticed. She walked slowly along the edge of the tide. It was still early. No footsteps but her own. The water curved gently toward her, never rushing, always offering. "You're back," the sea seemed to say. And she was. Not just here again, but here. Fully. Finally. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. And there it was. The rhythm. The one she'd felt before in the drift. The one that had followed her even when she didn't notice. It was in the waves. It was in her chest. It was in her name. She hadn't remembered it in a long time, not because she'd forgotten, but because the world had stopped saying it out loud. Luma, she whispered. My name is Luma. The moment the word left her lips, the tide rushed in, not loud, but strong. A gentle embrace. A confirmation. And then, something else. Something shining, just ahead in the surf. She stepped forward and reached down. It was a smooth stone, rounded perfectly by time and waves. Etched into its surface, not carved, but worn like a whisper, was a symbol. A spiral with a small wave beside it. She'd seen it before. In the drift. On the sandcastle. In the corners of her dreams. Luma turned it over in her palm. It felt warm, even wet. Like it had just come from a pocket deep in the sea. She looked around again. Still no one. But the beach didn't feel empty. It felt present. Aware. She walked farther, until the dunes rose around her in slow waves of grass and sand. There, tucked into the base of one of the dunes, was a circle of stones she hadn't noticed before. Not placed by hand. Placed by time. In the center, a tide pool. Still. Reflecting. She looked into it. Not at her face, though it was there. She looked through it. The pool shimmered, and for just a moment, she saw a girl younger than her, asleep in a tide cave. A boy drawing invisible maps in the wind. A city beneath the waves that had chosen to sleep. All different stories. All somehow connected. And then, just the sky again. Just Luma. She smiled, because she understood now. The beach wasn't just sand and sea and shells. It was memory. It was promise. It was a place that held stories long after the people telling them had gone home. She placed the stone gently beside the tide pool, adding it to the ring. Not an offering. A thank you. Then she turned toward the path back home. As she walked, the morning sun climbed higher, catching in her hair and casting her shadow long behind her. She didn't know when she would return, or how. But she knew this, the tide would always welcome her. Because this beach didn't need to ask her name anymore. It already knew. The boy who promised the ocean a lemon. Chapter 1, The Promise on the Breeze. Some children whisper secrets into seashells. But Nilo whispered to the sea itself. He lived in a cottage with bright shutters and crooked floorboards, nestled just above the softest beach you could ever imagine. The kind of place where the breeze always smelled a little like salt, and a little like something sweet, like sun-warmed lemons from the grove nearby. Every morning, Nilo would walk barefoot to the shore. One lemon in his pocket. Just one. He didn't bring it for lunch. He didn't squeeze it for juice. He brought it for the ocean. Because, long ago, on a quiet, cloudy afternoon, when he had been very small and very curious, he had made a promise. "I'll bring you a lemon," he had whispered, toes just touching the tide. "Because I heard you've never had anything sour. Just salt." The sea, of course, had said nothing. But a small wave had curled around his foot in response, like a pinky swear made of foam. And Nilo, being a boy of unusual sincerity, had taken that as a yes. So every day since then, he brought one lemon to the shore. He never threw it in. That didn't feel right. Instead, he sat beside the tide, peeled the lemon slowly, letting the zest release into the breeze, and talked. Sometimes he told the ocean about his dreams. Sometimes he read it short poems he'd scribbled on the backs of old envelopes. Sometimes he just listened. The ocean always answered in waves. Not with words, but with patterns and hushes and occasional bursts of wind that tousled his hair just so. He never told anyone about the lemon. It wasn't a ritual. It wasn't a game. It was something else. A promise kept. And the ocean remembered. One day, as Nilo peeled the brightest lemon yet, a gull landed beside him, not close, but near enough to be curious. The gull tilted its head. Then again. And then, to Nilo's surprise, it laughed. Not like a person, but like a sound that meant, "You think that's all the sea wants?" Nilo blinked. "It's not about what it wants," he said gently. "It's about what I promised." The gull didn't answer. It just lifted off and flew low over the waves, disappearing behind a glimmer of mist. That night, Nilo dreamed of lemons with wings, and oceans that hummed lullabies through shells. The next morning, he brought his lemon as usual. But something felt different. The air had changed. Not stormy. Not cold. Just waiting. Chapter 2, The Driftwood Door. The morning fog was softer than usual, as if the world were still deciding whether to wake. Nilo stepped out of the cottage with a lemon in his hand instead of his pocket. It felt warm already, as though it knew something he didn't. The path to the beach was quiet, no gulls, no crickets, no distant bells from the harbor boats. Only the steady shuffle of his bare feet brushing dew from grass. When he reached the shore, he expected to see the same wide stretch of sand, the same low tide curling back toward the horizon. But today, the beach had changed. Where seaweed and driftwood usually tangled in a lazy sprawl, something new had taken shape. It looked like a door. Not a real one. Not the kind with hinges and knobs. This one was made of sun-bleached driftwood, curved like a question mark, with smooth stones stacked carefully on either side. At the top, a spiral shell rested like a crown. And below it, in the sand, someone had drawn a lemon. Perfect and round. Nilo didn't speak. He just walked closer, holding his lemon tight. The sea was calm. Still. Watching. He stepped through the driftwood arch. The moment he passed under it, the air changed. It smelled like ocean, yes, but also like old citrus groves, wind through linen sheets, and something older than salt. The beach on the other side of the arch looked almost the same. But it wasn't. There were no footprints. No shells. No clouds. And no sound. Only the hush. It wasn't scary. It was like the kind of silence that lets you hear your own breath better. The kind that listens back. Nilo sat down in the sand. Slowly, he peeled the lemon. The scent rose immediately, crisp and bright, cutting through the hush like sunlight. He placed one spiral of peel into the tide. The wave accepted it gently, curling around it like a smile. Then, the sand beside him shifted. Something round rose up, pushed by the water from below. A glass bottle, but not ordinary. It was smooth and green-blue like sea glass, sealed with a plug of coral. Inside it, a note. Nilo reached for it carefully. The bottle popped open with a soft hiss, and the note unfolded like it had been waiting. There were no words. Just a drawing. A lemon. And a doorway in the sea. And behind the doorway, a room full of floating things. Scrolls. Shells. Bells. Bottles. And one figure, barely drawn. Curled up gently like someone asleep underwater. At the bottom corner, someone had etched a wave and a dot. He knew the symbol. It was the mark his grandfather used to make in the margins of old books. But his grandfather had passed when Nilo was 5. And he had never seen the sea. At least, not from this world. Nilo folded the note back into the bottle and placed it beside him. He looked at the arch, the tide, and the sun slowly rising behind the clouds. Then, softly, he said, "Okay. I'm listening." Chapter 3, The Sea That Waited with Its Eyes Closed. The next morning, the sky was the color of pearl, soft, streaked, undecided. Nilo stood at the edge of the dunes, lemon in hand once more, watching the sea as if it might blink. It didn't. But it felt awake. The driftwood arch was still there. Not a splinter out of place. But now, beside it, someone had drawn a spiral in the sand, not with a finger, but with something finer. Like the tip of a feather. It curled inward, over and over, like a map of something that had no middle. Nilo stepped through the arch again, and again the hush greeted him. Not silence, hush. There's a difference. He walked carefully, noticing how the grains of sand beneath his feet felt smoother. As if each one had been turned over by time 1,000 times too many. Far ahead, where the tide stretched and curled in slow breaths, he saw something strange. A shape. Low and long. It looked like a boat, but not one meant to sail. As he drew closer, he saw it was a raft. But not like the ones from stories about shipwrecks. This one was woven. Not from rope or vines, but from seagrass, thick, tight braids that looped together with seashell knots and driftwood beams. In the center was a bowl carved from coral. And inside the bowl, a single slice of lemon. Fresh. Bright. Waiting. Nilo stepped onto the raft. The moment he did, the tide pulled forward, not fast, not forceful. Just steady. The sea was taking him somewhere. And it didn't ask for directions. Time on the raft was strange. Not quite still, not quite moving. The sea was glassy, and above him, clouds parted just enough to show slivers of sky. He lay back, letting his fingers trail in the water. The hush was there, too, floating on the surface like light. Then, from beneath the raft, something stirred. Not a current, not a wave, a sound, not heard with the ears, but somewhere behind them. A tone, round, echoed, and then images. Not dreams, not memories, but almost invitations. He saw a room beneath the sand, lit by bioluminescent algae swirling like stars. A chair carved from whalebone and braided ropes, facing the sea. A large book, unopened, humming softly. And a pair of hands, small like his, lifting a lemon toward the tide. When he blinked, they were gone. But in his hand, the lemon he had brought was now missing a slice. Exactly one. And the sea around him had grown brighter, though the sun had not moved. The raft turned gently, guided by a current he couldn't see. And ahead, the sea parted. Just a little. Just enough to reveal stairs, carved from coral and moonrock, glowing faintly beneath the surface. They descended into the water like they'd always been there, waiting. Nilo stepped off the raft and placed his feet on the first stair. It held. Then the second. He looked back once. The raft had vanished. But he felt no fear, because the sea was not pulling him under. It was opening, and it had been waiting for a promise to return. Chapter 4: The room where the ocean writes its letters. The stairs held Nilo's steps like they had been carved just for him. Each one hummed beneath his toes, a soft vibration, like the purr of something old and kind. The water never rose above his knees. It didn't need to. The sea had simply opened around him, holding space instead of weight. As he reached the final step, Nilo found himself in a round chamber under the waves. It wasn't a cave, not really. It felt more like a room the ocean had grown around something sacred. The walls were made of smooth shells and folded sand glass. They shimmered, gently pulsing with the rhythm of the tide. In the center of the room stood a table. It was made of stone coral, bleached white and polished by time. Upon it sat a dozen smooth sea stones arranged in a spiral, just like the one he'd seen in the sand. And beside the spiral, a notebook. Its cover was soft, like damp cloth left out in the sun, and stitched with thread that shimmered silver and blue. Nilo touched it. And the moment he did, the room sighed. Not with air, with memory. The book opened without his asking. Pages turned, not by fingers, but by current. Words began to appear, written in salt. Not ink. Not pencil. Salt. Grains forming perfect lines, curling into characters and stories and shapes. They weren't in any language Nilo had seen. But he understood them. Because the words weren't read, they were felt. Each phrase bloomed in his chest like the warmth of the first sunbeam after rain. The ocean, it turned out, was a letter writer. Not to people, to time. And this was where it kept its drafts. Nilo watched, transfixed. He saw a letter to a boat that had never returned, telling it, "You are forgiven. You tried." A note to a girl who had once spoken to a wave every morning, even when it never answered. A whisper to a beach that forgot its name but still remembered the feel of footsteps. A A song for a lemon that had waited too long in a boy's pocket, but was never unwanted. Each page turned on its own, until one stopped. This page was blank. Nilo leaned closer, and the salt began to move, this time, forming lines that waited. Not a story from the sea, a story for it. His. There was no pen. But when Nilo reached into his pocket, he found one small lemon seed, warm from his hand. He set it on the page. It sank into the fibers like it belonged. Words formed around it. He didn't know what they said, but he knew what they meant. Here is my promise. I will return. I will listen. And I will bring the bright things back to you. The notebook closed itself. The lights along the walls shimmered once more. And from the far side of the room, the coral opened like a curtain. Beyond it, the tide. Home. As he stepped back into the water's embrace, Nilo didn't feel small. He felt held, cradled in a memory too old for maps. And as he rose through the waves, a familiar shape was waiting. His raft, still carrying the slice of lemon he'd left. Only now, it glowed faintly, gold, not yellow. As if kissed by a sun only the sea remembered. Chapter 5, when the lemon bloomed on the shore. The sea released Nilo like an exhale, slow, warm, and gentle. His raft barely rocked as he climbed in. The sun was rising now, soft gold draped across the tide like honey spilled on silk. The lemon slice sat beside him, glowing faintly. It didn't look like any lemon he had ever seen. It looked older, and somehow new. The kind of new that came after something had been deeply remembered. Nilo sat cross-legged, cradling the glowing slice in both hands, and let the tide guide him home. It didn't rush. Neither did he. The beach was empty, just as he'd left it. But not unchanged. Footprints, his own from the day before, had been erased by the tide. In their place were small marks. Round ones. Like the indents of tiny salt pearls. Or maybe lemon seeds. Nilo smiled without understanding, but with complete trust. The raft pulled itself gently onto the sand. Not with force, just certainty. He stepped off barefoot, holding the lemon slice still warm in his hands. And as his feet touched dry sand, something strange and lovely happened. The lemon shimmered. Not brighter, but deeper. Like it had reached a part of itself it didn't know was still growing. And then, slowly, it split. No burst, no sound, just a slow parting, as natural as a shell opening to the morning sun. Inside was a seed. Small. Simple. Luminous. He held the seed to his heart and walked the long way home. Past the dunes. Past the whispering reeds. Back to the garden outside his cottage, the one his grandfather had planted long ago. It hadn't bloomed in years. But now, Nilo knelt beside the oldest patch of earth, the one no one else had touched, and pushed the seed gently into the soil. He covered it with his hands. Not hurried. Not careful. Just present. And as he stood up, a breeze rolled in from the shore. Warm. Familiar. carrying salt and sea and something sweet. That night, Nilo dreamed of lemons. Not just fruit, but moments. Little, bright pieces of time scattered across the sand. A laugh echoing inside a shell. A promise whispered to the tide. A raft that knew its way home, no matter how far it drifted. He didn't dream of the room beneath the waves. Not exactly. But in the hush between sleep and waking, he thought he heard the ocean say, "Thank you, listener. You didn't forget." Weeks passed. Then months. The lemon tree sprouted. Its leaves shimmered like they were holding hands with light. And one single blossom appeared. It glowed faintly in the moonlight. The same warm glow as the lemon slice that once carried a boy through the hush. And Nilo? He still walked the beach every morning. Sometimes he found sea glass. Sometimes just silence. But once in a while, he found a sheep in the sand. Spiral. Gentle. Waiting. And always beside it, a tiny note left in salt. Still listening. The girl who found a door under the driftwood. Chapter 1: The Driftwood Path No One Noticed. There once was a girl named Omi who loved walking the beach after the tide had pulled away. She never searched for treasures. She just liked to wander. She walked barefoot, toes curling into damp sand, moving slowly enough to feel the cool hush of waves that had left only minutes before. Some people looked for shells or smooth glass or starfish, but only liked the things others stepped over. Little spirals carved by invisible crabs. Strings of kelp that looked like notes in a language only the sea could sing. And most of all, driftwood. Driftwood felt different. It wasn't just left behind, it had arrived. Each piece had a story. Some were pale and polished, like they'd traveled through clouds. Others were dark and knotted, like they had remembered storms. She never took them home. But she did name them. One long board with a perfect curl at the end? She called that one the sleeping cat. A crooked, three-armed branch was the wind's elbow. And a round, hollow stump with soft moss on one side? That was just Grandpa. Omi smiled at each piece as she passed. The beach, to her, was not just land. It was a quiet library. One where the books didn't have pages, just shapes and silence. One morning, after a night of wind and moonlight, Omi noticed something new. A stretch of driftwood she'd never seen before. Longer than usual. Darker too. Stacked together in a way that didn't feel random. She stepped closer, brushing aside sea grass that tangled around her ankles. And then she saw it. Nestled beneath the biggest log, half buried in sand and shadow, was something square. Something carved. Something hinged. It wasn't driftwood. It was a door. A wooden door, low and narrow, with a tiny shell-shaped handle and bits of seaweed stuck in its edges. Not a trapdoor. Not a hatch. A door. One that didn't belong there. One the tide must have brought. Her heart ticked once. Then again. Not fast. Just different. The way hearts move when they feel invited. She knelt beside the driftwood, brushing the sand gently off the door's frame. The wood was warm, not from the sun, but from something softer. It hummed, just a little, like it had just finished listening to a very long story and was ready for the next one. Omi placed her hand on the shell handle. It didn't feel like a handle. It felt like a question. She didn't pull. Not yet. She just sat beside it, listening. And the longer she sat, the more the beach quieted. Even the gulls seemed to hush. Even the waves softened, as if the tide was holding its breath and waiting. Chapter 2: The door that opened to nowhere and somewhere. Omi returned to the beach the next morning with the same quiet hope she always carried. The kind that didn't shout or bounce or tug. She hadn't told anyone about the door. Not because it was a secret, but because it felt like a whisper. And whispers, she believed, belonged to people who chose to listen. The tide had receded again, just enough to reveal the scattered driftwood. And yes, there it was. Still tucked beneath the largest log. Still waiting. The door hadn't moved. But somehow, it felt different. Less hidden. Almost curious. She sat beside it again. Let the wind braid her hair without asking. Let the warmth of the sand press gently into her legs. Then, quietly, she reached for the shell-shaped handle. This time, it turned. No resistance. No creak. Just a soft sound, like a sigh held for a very long time. And the door opened. Not wide. Just enough for a shimmer to spill out. Not light exactly. Not water either. Something in between. Like the idea of both. Inside was not a room. Not a staircase. Not a tunnel. It was space. A space filled with soft ripples. Tiny lights moved like plankton. Like dreams that hadn't decided what to become yet. Omi leaned closer. The air inside wasn't cold or damp. It was still. Perfectly still. The kind of stillness that came when everything was just where it should be. She reached in. Not with her hand, but with her heart. Not to grab. Just to feel. And in return, the space offered something. A small piece of sea glass. Green. Round. Warm. She took it gently, cupped in both palms. And the door, as if satisfied, closed softly. Omi didn't try to open it again right away. Instead, she stayed beside it, holding the sea glass. It pulsed faintly. Not like a machine. Like a memory. As if it had something to say, but was waiting for her to say something first. She did. Only one word. Hello. The glass glowed once. Then quieted again. She tucked it in her satchel. Not hidden, not buried. Just kept. Then she stood, dusted off her knees, and walked home. That night, while the wind curled around her cottage, Omi placed the sea glass on her windowsill. And as the moonlight touched it, the green glow returned. Slow and soft, like a lullaby humming to itself. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need answers. Some things, she knew, arrived like driftwood, not to explain, but to begin. And deep inside, just under her ribs, she felt something unfolding. A map, maybe, or a key, or just a path made of tide and time. Tomorrow she would return, not to open the door, but to listen beside it and see what it remembered. Chapter 3: The beach that drew a line in the wind. The third morning was different. The sky was still gray-blue, the same as always when Omi left her cottage. The gulls circled the dunes lazily, the sea oats whispered in the breeze, and her sandals made the same soft rhythm on the path of packed sand. But there was something in the air now. Not louder, not heavier, just more awake. As if the beach had begun paying attention. Omi arrived with her satchel, her folded cloth, her breath steady and slow. The tide had pulled back again, farther than the last 2 days. The door under the driftwood remained where she'd left it, shut, still, and humming so faintly it almost felt like her own thoughts. She sat, not to open the door, but to wait with it, to listen. The wind arrived slowly, brushing her cheek with the same greeting it had given her since she was small. It teased a bit of seaweed across the sand and tugged at the corner of her cloth. And then something strange happened. The wind paused. Not stopped. Not stilled. But waited. Right in front of her. It curled along the sand in a perfect, deliberate arc. And left a line behind. A line. As though the breeze had taken up a pencil and gently drawn across the shore. Omi blinked, then reached into her satchel. She pulled out a blank sheet of folded paper, and her charcoal pencil. She didn't know what she would draw. But she knew she had to follow that line. The charcoal met the paper. Her hand didn't hesitate. The line moved like the wind had. Sweeping, curving, dipping slightly as though it had learned how to breathe. And as the drawing continued, the air around her shifted. The waves, once distant and small, began to hush. The gulls lifted higher, then disappeared. The whole beach settled. As though the world were watching someone write their name for the very first time. When she finally looked up, the wind's line on the sand had begun to fade. Omi placed her finished drawing in her lap. It wasn't a map. It wasn't a picture of anything she'd ever seen. But it was true. The way dreams are sometimes true, even when they make no sense at all. She looked over at the driftwood, and the door beneath it was open again. This time wide. No glow. No sigh. Just open. Inviting. She didn't hesitate. She crawled forward and peeked inside. The same strange knot room was there. The shimmer of soft light. The quiet that wasn't quiet. But this time it moved. Like waves under silk. And in the center, something was waiting. A single piece of parchment, folded neatly. Omi reached for it. And the shimmer drew closer, wrapping gently around her hand like a ribbon of warmth. She unfolded the parchment. There were no words. Just a single curve. Drawn in the exact same shape as the one she had made that morning. Her eyes widened. The door hadn't just shown her something. It had learned from her. She wasn't just listening now. She was being heard. When she stepped away from the door, she didn't take the parchment with her. She left it there. Because she understood. That door wasn't a place. It was a conversation. And it wasn't finished. Not yet. She sat again, brushing her hand across the sand as the tide began to return. The breeze touched her temple like a kind word. And she whispered to the beach beneath her, "I'm still listening." And the wind drew another line. Chapter 4, The Tide That Waited to Speak Her Name. The fourth morning rose like a question. The light didn't arrive all at once, but instead in soft pulses, as if the sky were breathing. Omi stood in her room, still barefoot, still wrapped in her old linen shawl, watching the shoreline from her small round window. Today, something felt closer. Not just the sea. Something inside it. She slung her satchel across her shoulder and stepped out into the breeze. The sky was streaked with silver and pearl. Not stormy, just reflective. And the path to the beach was smoother than it had ever been. The wind had brushed away every footprint, every sign of yesterday. She walked slower this time. She didn't want to rush whatever was waiting. The driftwood was there. The door beneath it was closed again. But not silent. This time, it was humming more clearly, like the echo of a lullaby, the kind someone might hum while putting the ocean itself to sleep. Omi didn't sit right away. She stood, eyes closed, facing the door. She let the breeze find her. And it did. This time, it didn't draw a line. It whispered. Not in words, exactly. But in rhythm. A soft, spiraling rhythm that seemed to pulse with her heartbeat. She placed a hand on the driftwood. The moment she touched it, the door opened, gently, like a sigh. But the shimmer wasn't inside this time. The room beyond it had changed. It was no longer a quiet space under the sand. It looked like a shoreline. A whole one. Hidden beneath the beach she'd walked 100 times. The sky above was twilight-colored, even though morning still hung above her own world. The tide rolled in slow motion. Shells sparkled faintly like stars caught in sand. And in the center of that impossible shore stood a figure. A girl. Younger than Omi. Or older. It was hard to tell. She was barefoot too, her hair lifted by the wind in the same way Omi's shawl danced behind her. The girl turned. And smiled. Not a stranger's smile. But one Omi recognized, though she couldn't remember from where. The girl pointed down at her feet, and when Omi stepped closer, she saw it. A spiral, drawn into the sand. The same spiral that had been on the parchment 2 mornings ago. And surrounding that spiral, delicate letters, etched just deep enough to survive the tide. Her name. Omi. And below it, a question. Do you remember? Omi knelt down. Her fingers hovered just above the sand. And as her skin neared the letters, memories surfaced. Not memories of people. Not even events. But moments. The first time she ever noticed a cloud was shaped like a door. The night she swore the ocean whispered her name just before sleep. A dream she once had of walking underwater, without needing to breathe. Things she'd never told anyone. Things she'd barely told herself. And this place, this other shore, was holding them for her. Remembering, without asking. Welcoming, without explanation. The girl, who was she? A guide? A memory? A version of Omi, from somewhere the tide never fully returned from? It didn't matter. The feeling was what mattered. That someone knew her listening, knew her maps, her questions, her quiet. The girl pointed again, this time, farther down the beach, where the sea met something else. A shimmer. A second horizon. A door inside the water. Omi stepped toward it. But the tide reached up before she could cross. Not to pull her back. To speak. It swirled softly around her ankles, then curled up one leg, wrapping her in warmth. And then, from the waves, a sound. Clear this time. Soft. And unmistakable. We've missed you. Omi didn't ask who he was. She already knew. Chapter 5, The Door That Never Closed Completely. That night, Omi couldn't sleep. She didn't try. She simply lay in bed with her shawl tucked around her shoulders and the sound of the tide in her ears, even though the window was closed. It wasn't just that the beach had changed. She had. She didn't know what that meant exactly, only that the quiet had found a shape inside her. And it moved. When morning came, she didn't wait for the sky to finish waking. She rose with the gray light and walked barefoot to the beach. No satchel. No pencils. Just her and the hush. And as soon as her feet touched the sand, she knew. Today was different. The driftwood wasn't there. Not in the way she remembered. Instead, the sand had opened gently, like a curtain being drawn back. The door was visible, completely now. A perfect oval, carved into the place where the dunes met the tide. It wasn't made of wood anymore. It shimmered like sea glass, and it pulsed softly, like breath. Omi stepped through it. No hesitation. No question. Just listening. Inside, she wasn't in a room or on a beach. She was between them. A tidpole that stretched farther than any tidpole should. A horizon that curved upward instead of away. Time moved differently here. Or maybe it didn't move at all. And the girl, the one from before, waited in the middle. She was holding something. A shell. Omi reached out her hand, and the girl placed it gently in her palm. It was warm. And when Omi held it to her ear, she didn't hear the sea. She heard herself. Her questions. Her wondering. Her drawings. All woven together, like a lullaby made from moments. The girl smiled. Then stepped back. The sea glass walls around them rippled, and light spilled in like a slow tide. And in that light, figures. Dozens of them. Not people exactly. Not memories either. Some were shapes of breeze. Others were colors that didn't exist in the waking world. All of them familiar. And all of them waiting. Omi stood at the center of them. And for the first time, she spoke. "I'm ready." And the hush answered, not with silence, but with space. Room to dream. Room to remember. Room to become. Later, how much later, she didn't know, she woke up on the beach. The door was gone. The driftwood back in its usual place. The tide rolled in as usual. But something in the air had changed. A new hush. Not waiting. Just present. Just here. She sat for a while, toes in the sand, listening. Then reached into the pocket of her shawl and found the shell. Still warm. Still holding the hum of everything she'd forgotten she knew. She smiled. And she listened again. Because some doors never really close. Especially the ones that open inside you. And some beaches remember your name. Long after your footprints are gone.